Good day, viewers, and this is a special interview with Mike Fennell, sports administrator extraordinaire, and of course, Mike has been around for a very, very long time in especially the Olympic movement, and certainly, I'm sure you'd be very delighted to hear from Mike Fennell. Mike, first of all, we want to look specifically at your upbringing and your school life. How was it for Mike Fennell? Take us a while back as it relates to school and how you enjoyed it and so on.
Well, I need to pull on my memory quite a bit. Yes, as you know, and I think everybody knows, I went to Calabar. We're proud of it.
The best school in the country.
And I went there at a very early age because my elder brother was going, and I went and boarded at Calabar at Slipen Road, and then moved up to Red Hills Road where the school is now. And I certainly enjoyed my life there, both at boarding school and as a day boy. And I have very happy memories. Of course, like all schoolboys, we have our ups and downs, but certainly that was a very rewarding period of my life.
Was that experience at Calabar, was it the experience that changed your life in terms of sports? How did you get involved in sports specifically at Calabar?
I suppose it must have shaped my life quite a bit, because at school in those days, every single boy at the school had to participate in some event. We were all divided into houses, and by participating in events, you got points for participation. So participation was encouraged. Interestingly, one of the fundamental principles of the Olympic movement is participation, so it fitted in with where I was to go later on. Certainly participation was there. The other particular influence that was at school in those days was service, giving service to others. And we were always encouraged to be helpful in whatever way we could to other people, you know, particularly those that were not as fortunate as we were. And Calabar, in those days, we were all taking on various outfield trips during the weekends to assist with people, whether it was a blind school that was next door or to other communities to help. So you're brought up in an environment of service and assisting others.
Let's now, you in those days, certainly a lot of persons, a lot of schoolboys would have played a lot of sports. What sports did you play at Calabar, Mike?
I did everything. I dabbled in a little boxing, never represented the school at boxing. I represented the school at swimming and Sunlight Cup cricket. Played second and 11 football. I think that was about it.
Of the sports you dabbled into, which one would you say that you were best at?
Well, I suppose swimming and water, which eventually led me to water polo. I played a pretty decent Sunlight Cup cricket.
And then bat or ball?
Well, a little bit of both, and then went on to do more bowling when I played Junior Cup for a very long time for Kingston Cricket Club.
Okay, great. So you're seeing, of course, that Mike Fennell has all-round sporting ability. In terms of the support base your parents gave you, tell us a little bit about that.
My parents, of course, were like anybody who has a great fortune to have two parents, were absolutely fantastic. They gave you a lot of support, although they left you on your own to be independent. This is one of the other things that you get at boarding school. You have to fend for yourself, particularly with big boys around who are giving you a hard time. You know, you had to be able to defend yourself. But my parents, my mother was a great supporter, a great teacher in many ways, and my father, you know, his commitment to discipline and good order and so on is something that I benefited from.
Was any of your parents sports fanatic in any way?
Well, my father went to Cornwall College, and he played for Cornwall football, and also played for the Guild Club in Montego Bay, which is a club that existed at Gerald Park many, many years ago.
So you could understand why he would have given you that support, especially?
Yes, I'm sure that was the case.
Now, your next move, you left Calabar and went into the world of work. Tell us about that. How did it all started there?
Well, I had a choice of whether I should pursue a university education or go into business, and I had an invitation which I accepted at the time with a company which was known as Metal Box Company as a management trainee. And I worked there for a while. They exposed me to a lot of training, sent me to management courses in England. And I developed from there, and then I moved from there to Berger Paints, where I also furthered my business education, management education in particular. And certainly attended a lot of, apart from in-depth courses, mainly in the UK, but also seminars and workshops and so on. So I've done it all.
Right. And Berger Paints, at that company, you were managing director.
Yeah, I was there for a pretty long time. I was there for just over 23 years.
Wow.
And I went through the ropes of spending a year in Barbados, setting up a plant there, and then looking after the plants in Guyana, Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. And then I became managing director of the Jamaican company and also the Caribbean managing director.
During all that time, did you have enough time for sport?
Yes, it did not demand as much as it's demanding today, because in those days, you know, the sport was not as developed as it is and did not require the amount of time. And fortunately enough, you had the assistance from the workplace, where the companies that I worked for allowed the secretaries and so on to assist with that work, plus the other volunteer people who were elected to office. Certainly I had enough time, and in my work time I tended to dedicate my holiday periods to sport. So whenever there was a games on, that's what I used my holiday periods to do. I didn't take holidays separately.
Okay. People watching this interview would basically want to know, how did Mike Fennell get involved with the Olympic movement? Tell us how that all started.
Very simply, really. I played a lot of water polo. I represented Jamaica at water polo. And whilst I was there, I was invited to assist with boxing, both amateur and professional boxing. And for many years I was assisting with the timekeeping and very menial jobs with boxing. I was then asked to put myself forward as the honorary secretary. I served in that capacity for a number of years. And then I was elected president of boxing. During this time, of course, I was also elected as a vice president of the Olympic Association. And when the late Tony Bridge retired from that position, I was elected president in 1977.
Yeah. The experience with the Olympic movement, you've been involved with the Olympic movement for a very long time, Mike. How has it been for you? Give us an indication of what it has been for you.
It's a mixture of really a lot of enjoyment, a lot of work, and certainly a lot of triumphs and successes. I suppose one has to acknowledge the fantastic performances of our athletes, mainly track and field, but not only track and field in our Olympic sports. And the fact that they've done so well consistently over the years is the most rewarding thing, because when you volunteer to work in sport, you're really working for the benefit of the sport and the athletes in the sport. And when you see the athletes do well, and you know that the time and effort and sweat and tears have paid off with the sort of performances that you get, it's really very rewarding. I think also that the Olympic movement and my involvement in it has assisted me in perhaps developing my own skills at dealing with people, and in developing certain values that I have, values that are so dear to using sport as a development tool. Development not in monetary terms, but development in terms of the human potential.
Let me ask you this. Has the Olympic movement changed any since you started? In terms of the Olympics that you've been to, have you noticed any change maybe in terms of the athletes, in terms of how it is run over the years? Take us through it.
Oh, it's changed tremendously. First of all, technology plays a much higher role in it. The other thing is, of course, you have the scourge of drugs and doping in sport. Thirdly, we also have another major problem which continues and will continue for a very long time. That is the incursion of commercial interests, which sometimes runs contrary to sports interests. What I mean by that is that a lot of money is now in sport and in the Olympic movement. Large sums of money, very large sums of money. And when you have such large sums of money, quite often the monetary interests are trying to influence how you deal with certain principles and values in sport, and they do not always run on the same track. And I think that certainly those are some of the changes that we've seen. Obviously, the training methods in so many different sports have improved by the use of science and technology, and certainly the performances have improved over the years. My first Olympic Games was in Montreal in 1976, and certainly this came after the Munich Olympic Games.
And we all know
what happened in Munich with the really disgusting assassination of so many people. And Montreal was the first Olympics where we saw the introduction of high-level security. Now this has continued and developed, and we all recall what happened in Athens, how the amount of money they had to spend on security, the amount of effort to ensure, and this was for a different reason, because worldwide terrorism is now a major factor, not just in the stage in the Olympic Games, but any major event anywhere in the world, whether it's a World Trade Organization conference or an Olympic Games or a World Championships, Commonwealth Games, whichever one you're talking about. We now live in a world that's gone crazy with terrorism, and we have to guard against that.
Drugs in sports has really been a major factor. We've witnessed the Olympic movement having to take medals away from athletes because of, running with banned steroids and stuff like that. How has the older persons in the governing body dealt with this scourge on the sport?
Well, I think one has to admit that a lot of the older people were very naive. They didn't recognize how serious it was. They knew some people were using performance-enhancing drugs and substances. We go back to the days of the Eastern Europeans, the East Germans, the Russians and so on, and we thought that it was all there. And then it sort of was blown out of proportion when it was taken on hand in the Americas, mainly North America. And certainly this has been a scourge. And in a way, sports administrators have been slow in responding to this scourge, whilst at the same time the people who are promoting the use of illegal drugs and substances have had a lot of resources at their disposal and make a lot of money out of it. Now, I think we've got to recognize that several efforts have been made over the years to try and get rid of it, or to control it, or to seriously curtail it. And it's only since 1999, year 2000, that the efforts have really developed some teeth with the introduction of the World Anti-Doping Agency, which has, for the first time, got uniform acceptance right throughout the world between sporting bodies and governments for this fight against drugs. So that is why we have heard so many more incidents of people being found with drugs, and they're doing this retroactively as well.
Yeah. Can we win the war on drugs in sports?
That's a very difficult question to answer. The easy answer was probably no, because you can't win the world on drugs, even in the illegal use of drugs outside of sports. That's a major problem worldwide. And despite all the efforts that have been made, we don't seem to be winning that war. And when I say we, I'm talking about the human race. I think that whilst we may not be able to win it totally, with the efforts and the resources now being put into the fight against doping and drugs in sport, this will be controlled to a minimum, and the more we get everybody to understand that the penalties will be severe and very embarrassing, certainly that will have an effect on it that will reduce it to the minimum. But what is critical at the same time is that we improve the education of our youngsters, education of our athletes, education of our coaches, education of our officials, so that they in turn know that this is not the way to go. Many people do not know that there are many, many legitimate ways of improving sports performance from a scientific point of view, whether it's through biomechanical studies or better diets, better sort of social habits and so on. And these can go a far way to improve performance without having to resort to drugs and doping. And lastly, I think that the financial penalties should be there, because as you know, quite often, it's really financial attractions or financial penalties will give you the final say in what really happens eventually.
How is your organization moving to, especially the GOA? You're in charge of the GOA, the president of the GOA. How has your organization gotten the move on in terms of dealing with this issue?
Well, for many years we've had an anti-doping policy which we've influenced all our affiliates, all the sporting bodies in Jamaica who are affiliated to us to buy into, and they've bought into that. We were very early in signing into the WADA Convention, the World Anti-Doping, as a non-government body. Mm-hmm. And through our influence, the government of Jamaica has now fully gone on board, and they have a program where they're setting up the National Anti-Doping Agency and a National Anti-Doping Program. This has come not only because governments agree to this at the United Nations, but we have been a big influence with our government, and also the influence of the international federations and the International Olympic Committee, who have said that if you do not comply with some of these regulations, then your athletes will not be able to participate in the top international events. So it's not a matter of why or maybe. We have to do this, but we're ahead of the game, and certainly this has been helped by the fact that we do have a large number of international athletes, and we could never ever put their careers on risk by not complying with all the regulations.
Mike, what would you consider your best Olympic Games?
Wow, that's a difficult one. Of course, my first Olympic Games in Montreal is still fresh in my memory. That will always leave an impression on you. You'll have the Olympic Games of Seoul, which were very well organized, very, very structured, very much structured in everything that they did, but perhaps did not have the warmth of say, Barcelona or Los Angeles. Uh-huh. Los Angeles, to my mind, was extremely good. The Olympic movement was at that time threatened because they were losing a lot of money, and the Los Angeles Olympics was a turning point in the Olympic movement in terms of its financial viability and profitability. In 2004, Athens was also wonderful from many points of view. I would not like to pick out one out of the other because they all had characteristics which were unique to them. I think all of them are fantastic experiences.
Of all the Olympics that you've been to, any one of the Olympics that stands out in your mind, not for the positives, but maybe for a few bad things that happened that you'd really want to forget, put to the back of your mind, so to speak, Mike?
Yes, again, I go back to Montreal. The high about that was Donald Corey's performance in Montreal. The low was the debates and arguments went on about boycott because of the apartheid situation, the withdrawal of a number of African countries, and certainly there was a lot of confusion then about what it was all about. The athletes who were withdrawn from those Olympic Games from Africa didn't have a clue what the issues were. I saw people in tears when they were prevented from taking part, and they did not understand the issues. The other Olympic Games where we had the great disappointment was in Sydney, when we had a demonstration by some of our athletes, and that was another very low point. Again, totally senseless demonstration, and one that is best forgotten. High points, Donald Quarry, 76, Dion Hemmings in 84, people like Grace Jackson in 88 in Seoul, Juliet Cuthbert in Barcelona in 92, Veronica Campbell.
Let me ask you this, a very pointed question. Some people, some athletes who would have been on the same team with Merlin Ottey believe that Merlin Ottey is very difficult to get along with. Have you ever, you've been in this movement since 1972, How's it been like being at an Olympic Games with Marinotti?
I don't want to be judgmental, but I'll just make a very simple statement. One of the things that I had to learn as a leader in sports is how to deal with stars as different from other people. And stars are the same whether it's in athletics or in music or in drama or what it is. If you talk about Pavarotti, the great opera singer, who is fantastic, he's not easy to work with. He has peculiar things, and that's a part of his genius. There's another famous opera singer called Maria Callas in the past. She was also very, very difficult. I recall a very simple incident that when we went to Moscow in 1980, there's a young sprinter who was fussing around when we had a one-on-one conversation. He wanted to know why we're making such a fuss of Donald Quarry. And nobody else mattered and so on. I had to have quite a chat with him. And my advice to him was that you realize that Donald Quarry was a gold and silver medal from the previous Olympics in '76. If I were you as a young sprinter, I would watch Donald Quarry, watch what he eats, look at how he sleeps, how he spends his time, and try and copy it, and not be jealous of the attention that he's receiving. I'm trying to answer you in a roundabout way by saying, yes, people like Marinotti and others have their idiosyncrasies, and one of the things that has made Marinotti great is her ability to focus on what she has to do. And when she has to perform, she doesn't go to parties, she doesn't go to other things that some people will clown around with and so on. She has a very tight focus on what she's going to do. And that has been misunderstood by a lot of people. And I must admit sometimes it's very difficult to communicate with her, but that's her genius. And I think this is something that we have to understand. Obviously, some people felt that it could have been better. That's their opinion, and we have to share that. But I think when you have people like that around, it's important for others to understand how to deal with situations like that.
Wrapping up our interview with Mike Fennell, of course, a long-time sports administrator. Mike, a few things that I'd really like to touch on. Of course, you look at your stint in boxing. Give me a little indication of what sort of experience was it like for you?
Again, another very rewarding experience because I spent a lot of time with the amateurs. I used to go and train with them. I used to go and exercise with them.
Really?
Yes. People like Michael McCallum and Trevor Berwick and so on. And I recall with Michael McCallum, he went to Montreal to the Olympic Games. And when I thought at the end of the bout in the quarterfinals, when he had certainly made it to the semis, which would have put him into the medal winning, we got one of the most atrocious decisions I've ever seen, and everybody acknowledges. Yeah. From there he went to Moscow and had the unfortunate thing he was sent there early for training prior to the Olympic Games in Moscow, and had to have his appendix out, which ruled him out of the games, and then he turned professional after that, and I maintained my contact with him. There are many other boxers that I helped with the activities in the Guinness Gym, Dragon Gym, and the other gyms that existed, and I spent a lot of time there with them, really seeing how they could develop. And you know, I would love to see the day when boxing can come back to where you have those activities in the gyms, where people quite often, and I remember the old boxing coach at Calabar, T.K. Wint, he used to come, and anybody who got into a little scuffle with anybody else, he said, put on the gloves and solve it according to the rules. You don't solve the problems with a street fight. Put on the gloves, solve your differences according to a set of rules. And you are taught to do that. By the same token, I think that sport and boxing has a lot to offer in Jamaica right now with our problems with crime and violence. If you can attract the youngsters into sporting activities where they are required to play by a set of rules, they are taught and encouraged and influenced to develop certain values within their own lives. It would help us when they go to the street as ordinary citizens. But certainly my time with boxing. But perhaps the biggest thing that happened to me in boxing was my role in bringing the world heavyweight title fight here between George Foreman and Joe Frazier.
Tell us about that.
It started in a very simple way because there was a person who came down and called me up from the then Sheraton Hotel, it's now the Hilton Hotel.
Right.
Went up and had a meeting. He was a bit of a promoter, but not a boxing promoter, who thought this was a possibility, and we talked about it. And then the government had just changed. Michael Manley had become Prime Minister, and I called up a number of ministers. Douglas Manley, the Prime Minister's brother, was then a member of the boxing board, and I asked him to get together a number of the ministers. We had lunch at a restaurant which was on Worthington Avenue. It was known as a Continental Restaurant, where I outlined to them the possibilities, what it would require, and they were all shocked that we could ever think of hosting a world title fight. I said this was possible, but as president of the boxing board at the time, I could not take part in the promotion because I was the regulatory body and therefore had to be separated from the promotion. And they indicated to me that whilst it had not yet been announced that the late Paul Fitzgerald was going to be appointed chairman of National Sports Limited, and that National Sports Limited, which was the government body responsible for the stadium, could be the promoter. And it went on from there until everything came on board, and I was responsible for regulating the whole of that fight and drafting up the rules for that fight.
The success of that fight?
It was not a financial success, but it was a success in so many different ways. It's still very much in memory of George Foreman and Joe Frazier. Everybody thought it was going to be a walkover for Joe Frazier when George Foreman demolished him here right at the National Stadium. The success of having a huge crowd on a world title fight and at the same time promoting Jamaica as a tourism destination is still reaping results from that, because when you go back into the memoirs of boxing,
you'll always see that.
That always comes out. And I think it was a fantastic experience, personally and for Jamaica.
Boxing, the state of boxing at the moment is not something that, as a person who loves boxing, you tend to feel that we're in a dire situation at the moment. What can we do to revive the sport, Mike?
I think, first of all, one must acknowledge that a lot of effort is made to get it back on its toes. And there have been one or two promotions. But we've got to get back the gymnasiums being very active with the boys in the gyms, exercising and learning the fundamentals and the rules of boxing right from the beginning. For a long time it has been kept out of the school system, and there's no reason why it should not be brought back into the school system. The sport is regarded by many as a dangerous sport, as a cruel sport, but the rules for amateur boxing ensure that the boxer is protected at all costs. And they're now wearing headgear. The incidence of cuts and bruises and so on have been reduced to a very, very minimal number. And it's a sport now that can be really used for the development of certain values in our youngsters. So that needs to get back into the school system, and also the gymnasiums. I think we need to get back some gymnasiums in Kingston, Montego Bay, and the major cities around Jamaica.
Swimming, your stint in swimming, tell us about that.
Well, I acted on the swimming council for some time. I played water polo for Jamaica, and also the record will show that I was the only captain of a West Indies water polo team,
really?
which went to the Pan American Games in 1959.
Okay.
Because during that time there was a West Indies Federation, and Jamaica was part of a West Indies team that went to the Pan American Games in 1959 and to the Olympics in Rome in 1960. We were part of a West Indies team.
Okay.
Of course, with the breakup of West Indies Federation in 61, 62, we all went back to individual countries.
Mm-hmm. Now, as we look forward, Mike, what's your goal? First of all, you've now procured an office. The Jamaica Olympic Association now has an office. Tell us about what is happening at the office and why the need for an office as opposed to your former location.
Well, over the years we've borrowed things all over the place and so on. And the Olympic movement in Jamaica is far more important than that. It needs better support. In this office here, we're sitting in what will be a training room. And this is a seminar room where it can seat maybe up to 36 classroom style. And we want to focus a lot of attention on training and development of people. That's not just coaches, administrators, but also it can be used for training programs for athletes brought here with the technology and the facilities for doing that. We're also in the process of developing a proper Olympic library, where we'll have books and records and so on that people can come and do research and have an understanding of what it's all about. And soon, hopefully, we'll add to this an electronic library where you can have access to things all over the world and to use technology to the hilt, where even with the training, we can do distance learning in here by accessing expertise and the best quality of trainers from abroad without having to bring them here. These are things that we want to develop, the leaders. And if you think about it, we have spent a lot of time in developing our athletes and coaching our athletes. We also need to coach and develop our administrators, our coaches, and all our leaders, because they also need training, just like in any other business. The education and development of those people must run hand in hand with the development of our athletes.
Finally, Mike, you've done it all. You've been involved in sports. You've been an administrator extraordinaire in the local sporting arena. You are now the president of the Jamaica Olympic Association and also on the board of the Olympic movement. Would you in any way want to take the top job in the Olympic movement? Has that ever crossed your mind, Mike?
No, not really. I think that's a job that certainly I would regard as perhaps bigger than me.
Why?
Because if you look at what it demands of the sort of recognition and commitment from all the stakeholders, it almost suggests that if you're not from a big country, you'd have a very difficult time getting that sort of respect. Currently, I'm president of the Commonwealth Games Federation, which is the next largest body worldwide, where we have 71 members from all continents. I've been president of that now. I'm in my third term, where I've had to work very hard, and I think I've gained a tremendous respect from everybody, large countries, the Great Britain, Australia, Canada, and so on.
But then the move to the next level wouldn't be that difficult at all for Mike Fennell.
No, it's not that easy, and I wouldn't like the Peter principle to hit me. I wouldn't like to be moving up into a level of incompetence. I think I must know my limitations, and it's not that I'm not ambitious and wouldn't like other things, but I think that you can take ambition a bit too far and go beyond your capabilities.
Well, Mike, it was certainly a pleasure speaking with you. I personally gained a lot from this interview. Certainly some of the historical background of the Olympic movement was at the forefront of my mind when I came here, and really I'm very enlightened. Thank you very much for talking to us, and we wish you all the best.
Well, thanks very much for this interview, and of course you've only got a snippet of some of the things I've done, so thanks very much.
There will be a second.
Okay. No.